You too.
All right, so Doug, as always, has done a great job of teeing it up for our first conversation this morning, although I don't think we're going to spend an awful amount of time on the new mouthpiece for the White House. I mean, really, what's there to talk about? I don't know that the message will change all that much. I will say this. They had a lot of people who were in the till for that. There were a lot of people who threw their hat in the ring, just to further even more metaphors here. And some of them may have been seen, perhaps, a little bit more partisan than this president might have wanted, since he's trying to strike such a centrist tone. So this is a nice, I think, neutral pick. But I'll ask my guest real quickly. Billy Hallowell is sitting next to me. He's a political commentator. BillyHallowell.com if you want to check him out. And joining us via satellite is Democrat strategist David Mercer, founder of Mercer and Associates. Good morning to you both. Thank you both for being here. Real quick,
Good morning, Good morning, Billy.
Good morning.
On this pick.
I think it's first of all, it's time for a change. So it's good that we're getting the typical change up here after 2 years. I'll personally be happy to see Gibbs go. But
why?
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of him. He didn't really resonate with me, didn't really connect well with him. I think it's important that this person who comes in is very centrist, especially after the November election. We have another election coming up in 2 years here, and I think a big piece of Gibbs leaving is that election and his role in that upcoming, campaign.
Interesting. Your quick thoughts, David?
I think the president will be well served by, one has been well served by Gibbs, a major confidant as well as a spokesman for the president. And I think Jay Carney, having spent 2 years with the vice president in the White House, has gotten the lay of the land, but bringing all his credentials that Doug had spoken to with regard to his being a former White House correspondent, being at Time Magazine in the Washington Bureau. And I think that all will contribute to a successful transition, at least with regard to that post, in defining a clearer line as to what the president's policies and directions are and amplifying that.
All right, let's move on. I want to talk about the big breaking news this morning that's unfolding in Egypt. This is an ally. This is a country that really, if things don't get right on the ground, we could see a very bad situation, a ripple effect around the world. And just so people know what I'm talking about, Egypt is dealing with a situation where they've got protesting in the streets. They've got unhappy tens of thousands of anti-government protesters pouring in the streets of Egypt just this morning, stoning and confronting police who fired back with rubber bullets and tear gas in the most violent and chaotic scenes yet in the challenge to President Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. They want him out. And even a Nobel, and I'm reading directly from the AP wires now, even a Nobel Peace Laureate was soaked by water cannon and forced to take refuge in a mosque. Groups of thousands of protesters are chanting, "Out, out, out," gathered at least 6 venues in Cairo. And by the way, there are 18 million people who live in Cairo. It basically dwarfs New York City. Like, if we were next to Cairo, we'd be in the shade. This is huge. And just to put it in perspective, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton this morning kind of putting a word out there that y'all need to get it together. I'm paraphrasing. She didn't call them y'all. This is a problem. Your thoughts, David?
I think it is a problem for the reasons that you outlined, and I think we have to have a very tempered response. I would hope that with what we're seeing on the on TV now would temper down, and that somehow we can get this indoors and off the streets. I don't know how that's going to come about, but I'm sure both internally to Egypt and with those neighbors as well as the United States working at means to do just that, because this is looking like it's only escalating, and we got to get it to a point where there's dialogue and not fisticuffs.
Your thoughts?
This has huge implications for the United States, and so we really need to be very careful in how we handle it. Clearly doing the right thing would be supporting the people in their country who would like to see regime change, but again, huge implications for us. We've had some issues with our relations with Egypt, as we've seen from the WikiLeaks documents that have come out and the wire. So we know that there are already issues going on, and we have to be very careful how we handle this with a key ally.
Yeah, this, and I know what you guys are going to push back with. Well, the countries are completely different. It does sort of have shades of Iran. When the people were marching in the streets, and we heard Mrs. Clinton become much more vocal then, And that's when a lot of people thought she might be running for president against Barack Obama in 2012, because she said something to the tune of, you got to listen to the people, to the president. You know, it was kind of like, well, if I were president, I'd be supporting the people. What do you do here?
Harris, the one key distinction on Iran, and that being Israel. And as you know, the relationship between Israel and Egypt is very, very strong. And that is partly also why we're so concerned about it as well. And the relationship being a strong one, of course you would want that extended with other Arab states, but that is a major concern and major distinction between Egypt and Iran.
How does this affect our relationship with Israel? Like, what, you know, I mean, if you have unrest in that region, there's always an opportunity for one of the bad eggs to step up and say, you know what, everybody's looking over there.
Well, absolutely. That's why the danger here is if we're too supportive, we don't know who's coming next. I mean, that we look at Iran, we look at what happened during the revolution. The next leader could be much worse than the current leader, obviously. And this leader in particular in Egypt has been very friendly to Israel overall. So there are huge implications for Israel as well as the United States in this.
Yeah, I mean, potentially what I'm saying is somebody in Egypt could be looking at this and saying, well, everybody's focused on Hosni Mubarak and these protests. Let me rise up and lead.
Absolutely.
You know, because the protests, I looked at the video, there may be, let's pretend there are 100,000 people in the streets. I don't even think it's that many, but let's say that, okay, then you still have 17,900,000 people who could who could go follow some dude who decides to step up, and then his first course of action is to take out Israel.
Well, my feeling on this is that it will create greater uncertainty when we're trying to work with the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership to stay at the peace table. You know, this we don't need. And so, again, you know, you hope for both a smooth and easy pulling back off the streets to have internal discussions. Of course, Mubarak has got to address this, and he's got to address it quickly, and not just by shutting down Twitter and Facebook and other means of communication. Yeah. You know, because it is there, and it's going to continue to exist.
You know, anybody who questions the power of these friendship sites ought to take a look at the situation in Iran and Egypt. I mean, when you can cut off a country from communicating by cutting down friendship sites, that says a whole lot about where we've come with technology. I mean, we do not kick it old school anymore in any way, shape, or form. No one's picking up the phone very much. This, just crossing the urgent wires, the White House now having a little bit to say from an administration official on the situation. The president has requested multiple briefings each day on the situation in the Middle East, meaning we've been keeping up. Today, he received a memo updating him on the latest in Egypt from the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon. Later this morning, he will receive another update during the press briefing. So they're keeping up to date on this. And why float this?
Well, it seems like they want people to know we're paying attention to it, we're looking at it, but they're not taking definitive stances on it yet. And that's probably a healthy thing to do. Again, it's a balance between doing what is right and being afraid of what is going to come next. You know, who's the next leader that could possibly rise up. So there are a lot of considerations they have to make, but I would say that that's probably the proper course of action at this point.
All right. Now, I'm just reading something again that's crossing wires. Who's circling for power is the big question this morning. Some people are saying a growing middle class. Others say extremists. Boy, you hope it's the middle class.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not the extremists. David, tread lightly. Listen, you see that's kind of what the White House is doing. But then what do you do if they put in somebody who we don't like? Or who doesn't like us? I think that's more important.
Again, I'm very cautious about speculating and going to what Billy said. You know, our response has to be measured and based on facts and what is happening on the ground, as opposed to projecting what we, might speculate or might desire, because that's not our call necessarily in an internal, domestic, sovereign state. So, you know, we do have to monitor, we have to measure, we have to see what the requests are coming from both sides. I'm sure that we have channels to those that, especially the Muslim Brotherhood and and also the Mubarak government as to what their issues are and what their desires are. And if we could be helpful in reconciling them, we will be there. But in the meantime, we have to be measured in our response.
Is there an expiration date that's already passed on how much the world will listen to us?
I don't think so. I think that we give a lot of aid to a lot of countries, obviously, and Egypt being one of them. We give billions of dollars to them in aid. And so you always have that as a leveraging factor. And even though some have argued that we've declined, we still are America. We still are the primary nation that people go to for that sort of assistance. So I don't think that...
I think to Billy's point, if you take Iran and the UN sanction vote from last year, I mean, shucks, we brought Russia and China to the table to vote in favor of those UN sanctions. So we still have a voice in the global geopolitics.
Yeah, I'm getting a Robert Pickle bingo, Harris, along with my question about how much the rest of the world listens to us. You know, you hope that and here we've got this video. This is pretty unbelievable. I mean, you would not think of Cairo as this. It is usually a very beautiful, peaceful city.
Wow.
Yeah, and I hear you saying, wow, what is your reaction when you see this video?
Oh, it's a little startling. I mean, it seems like we have a pattern going on in the Middle East, and we've seen this happen, obviously, in Iran, Tunisia, we saw this happen. So it seems like the power of new media, social media, is actually fueling some of this. So it's a little startling, but there's a little pattern developing as well.
Alex Melnick Jr. says, just say it, we buy our friends. I mean, that's kind of...
We'll leave it to Alex's statement to have been said.
All right. Okay, Alex, look at that. You get the last word on this. Wow. See, that's why I love our viewers. They're very astute. Okay, let's talk about something that's being looked at by critics this morning after the State of the Union speech and after the president spoke at his address. That's redundant. Spoke at the memorial service in Arizona a couple of weeks ago for the victims of the Tucson tragedy. When you kind of look at all of that, you do get a sense, and maybe he would even say it, moving forward, but moving forward not so much for the country, certainly for him. Is this a new Obama or an old Obama repolished and ready for 2012?
Well, I think it's an Obama that's really considering 2012 very strongly. A lot of the things he said in the State of the Union were clearly not defined properly. It was very general. And so I'm not sure. I mean, actions speak louder than words, so we're going to have to see what is to come. But we're still talking about spending, government, quote-unquote, investment. We're still talking about a lot of the same things he was doing, but I think he's trying to appeal it more to a centrist
Yeah, well, and he's come up with this new term, and the jury's still out on whether or not we're going to be saying it a few days from now, winning the future. Which, by the way, didn't Newt Gingrich write a book called Winning the Future or something like it? Maybe it wasn't exactly that title. I'll get it right. I'll Google it and get it right. But it was like that, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know. Did he steal it? Who knows? But will we be saying it? Is that centrist enough? And what does centrist even mean, David?
Well, I have trouble with it, and I wouldn't define the speech as moving left, moving right, center. I will say, in answer to your initial question, that it's the same Obama, at least that I've known, and I think that we saw in the campaign and coming into governance. You know, what he stressed here was, and found a voice and an articulation of it is, we are facing different challenges than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. There is a new economy that is on the rise. And that if we're going to compete, he laid out the tools and the pillars that we're going to have to stand by in order to compete, be it by education, innovation, and being competitive. We can't go up against India, China, and other emerging countries, Turkey, Brazil, and others, and keep pace on GDP and so forth if we are not growing our economy through competition, innovation, and education. And I think he found a way to present that picture to the American people, not through a matter of fear or doom and gloom, but with optimism, and that we have no other option but for winning the future. And I think, most of us would agree that is our only option. Failure is not an option.
David, I would agree on some of the things you just said about the sentiment and what he was saying, but this is not the same Obama that we saw in the 2008 campaign, and it's specifically not the same Obama that we saw last year. He's made a shift.
How do you see?
Well, he's made a shift more towards the center. Clearly, the tax agreement, clearly a lot of the things he has done, he's continued the war in Afghanistan. I mean, he has done a lot of the things he said he wouldn't do, and
yeah,
vice versa.
The war in Afghanistan and those tax cuts, that's a tax cuts extension. That's more of a shift to the right almost than the center. David,
if I might clarify just on that.
10 seconds, because I don't want to lose you off the
satellite.
satellite.
He has stood by providing tax cuts extensions to the middle class, 98% of the American people. It was the Republican leadership that pushed the tax cut for the rest of the 2% of millionaires and billionaires. He was not going to sacrifice the middle class, the majority of Americans, on the altar of political warfare debating that issue.
No,
so he has stood his ground, but he had to do business with the Republicans who insisted on it. So in a bipartisan spirit, he did it, but we also got 98% of the tax cuts for the American working family.
You know, David, it's not often that I hear you break out those TPs, those talking points.
They're not talking points.
You just whip those
real.
out and just slap me across the face with them. That's okay, my friend.
They're headlines.
They're going to cut your mic, but not because of that. Now, we're going to lose you off the satellite, and I hate it when that happens.
All right, good to see you, Harris and Billy.
Same to you.
All right, have a good weekend, my friend. Okay, we're going to take a really quick break. We'll be right back.